This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cora product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting inside of your vagina. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora today, and you'll receive your first month's supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 143. Welcome to the 143rd episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. I spoke a little bit about this in the previous episode, but I wanted to come to you and really talk about how to choose a practitioner. It's a question that I'm getting a lot more these days, and I'm getting a lot of requests for referrals. And, unfortunately, the world is such a big place. I just don't have a list of practitioners in, every corner of the world. But I do believe that there are, dozens, hundreds, thousands of amazing practitioners, and many of them are in your backyard and you may just not be aware of them. So in this episode, I talk about, how to find some of those and how to vet them and how to just make sure that you find someone that you're in really good alignment with in terms of their treatment strategies and outlook, and also area of specialization, area of expertise. And what you find when you're working with different practitioners is that each practitioner is coming from a different perspective. So someone like me, for example, I have an extensive training background specialization in menstrual cycle charting. And so the perspective that I approach when I'm working with a client, I'm looking at those charts and really getting that detailed information, and having experience in understanding and reading and interpreting charts. That gives me a vast amount of information to be able to kind of hone in and ask the right questions, really try to figure out what could be going on. And just having practitioners that are coming from different perspectives to help you ask the right questions, that is really how, in my experience, healing takes place. Because until you ask the right questions, you can't really come up with the answer to the problem. You have to first identify the problem to be able to come up with the answer. So if you'd like more information about the programs that I offer and what I do, I would encourage you to head over to my Work With Me page. So that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And you can actually schedule a free 15-minute consultation with me if you have questions about the programs that I offer or would like more information. So that's at fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And before we jump into today's episode, I just want to take a moment and thank our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. So you already know by now that I really love Cora's products. I really love the care and intention that has been taken to create products with you and me in mind, and really being conscientious about our health, making sure to create a product with organic cotton, free of pesticides, free of toxins, free of synthetic materials. Because of course, coming from the field that I'm working in, I can see how incorporating different chemicals and toxins can actually have a negative impact on your menstrual cycle. It can show up right there in your chart. And in a recent conversation I was having with a client of mine, she mentioned, she's been making a couple different shifts to improve her health. But one of the shifts that she made was switching products. So switching from conventional tampons and pads. And she noted already shifts in her menstrual cycle. So it's really powerful stuff. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Cora, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora. And when you sign up, you actually get your first month's supply free of charge. So that's really an incredible offer that Cora is giving to the Fertility Friday community to allow you to actually try out the products and try out the service, and also get that kind of concierge service of having tampons delivered right to your door. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. Now let's hop into today's episode. Today I have a very special show for you. I have been talking about this particular topic quite a bit with my one-on-one clients, with my group clients. It's something that comes up in pretty much every appointment, and it's actually something that comes up in most of the podcast episodes. But recently I've just been getting a lot of emails from women who are wanting to know, how do I find a really great practitioner in my area? Do you know anybody who lives in my area who could support me the way that I'm wanting to be supported? So in today's episode, I'm tackling the topic of how to choose a practitioner. I think it's really important. It's something that I try to stress in every episode, and I've said it on quite a few podcasts, but just the idea that you really want to think about who's on your team. And when you switch your perspective in that way, then it's really helpful, because I think a lot of times we want it to be easy. We want to be able to just go to, our doctor's office, and for our doctor to have all of the answers to all of the questions and just kind of fix us up in one fell swoop, give us something. And we take it and then everything is just great. But, we are just more complicated than that. Our bodies are more complicated than that, our hormonal systems. And there's a lot of different moving parts. And so in my personal experience and in my professional experience as well, it really does take a team, especially when you're struggling with some more significant challenges. So there's a few things that I want to go through with you today when you're thinking about choosing a practitioner that I feel will be very helpful for you. They've been helpful for my clients, and you'll notice some of the themes that run through this episode that we've talked about in several other episodes. The first point that you'll want to consider when you're choosing a practitioner is you really want to take a moment to consider where your practitioner is coming from, what your practitioner's perspective is on health and healing, and what their goals are in your care. And so, although it may not always be really obvious right off the bat, when you really take a moment and step back and think about it, that just knowing where they're coming from and trying to respect where they're coming from, even if you disagree with it, will help you to navigate the waters and also choose the right practitioner. So an example of that is, a lot of the clients that I work with struggle with thyroid issues. And I had a moment where I was reflecting on why that could be. And part of the reason is that thyroid issues are associated with menstrual cycle irregularities. So then it would just make sense that it's not that so many women with thyroid just coincidentally come to me. I believe that it's because thyroid issues affect your menstrual cycle in ways that then would cause you to be more likely to reach out for support. But with that said, there's two very different paradigms and perspectives at play with respect to thyroid disorders. So that's a good one for an example. I've talked about thyroid disorders many times. I've had a number of guests on the show. And so I'll invite you to go to the show notes page, and I'll actually link to some of the previous thyroid episodes that I've recorded and interviews. If you're new to the show and you really want to kind of dive into thyroid health a little bit more, that's a really great place to start. But from that perspective, okay, so you have a thyroid issue, you go to your doctor. What is your doctor's goal? What is the perspective that your doctor, your medical doctor that's classically trained, not coming from a functional perspective, what is your doctor's goal? And so from my experience, both professional and personal, your doctor's goal really is to get your TSH to the number that they've decided is a good number. And so depending on what conditions you're struggling with, that number could vary a bit, but ultimately their goal is to keep your TSH at a certain point. So I've had a number of clients who, they've done testing, they've discovered that they have some sort of issue with their thyroid. They go to their doctor. The standard of care is to prescribe Synthroid. And Synthroid is very good at typically at getting the TSH to where you want it to be. So as far as the doctor is concerned, who's coming from that perspective, you're good if the TSH is that level. So I've had a number of clients who maybe they're not feeling well, or maybe their menstrual cycles are still just, there's basically no real shift in their menstrual cycle or their metabolism. Their temperatures are still low. Some of them feel good. Some of them don't feel good. But either way, we haven't really seen a shift. But now the TSH is in line. And so I bring that up because you have to really understand what is the perspective that your practitioner is coming from and what are their goals. So if your practitioner's goal is to get your TSH to a certain number, then once it reaches that number, the practitioner is satisfied. And if you're not feeling good still, it just doesn't align with their goals. Like they've achieved their goal. So the first thing is really figuring out what it is that you really want. And I've never really met anybody who's ultimately who doesn't want to feel good. So usually the goal for you as the patient, when you're seeking support from a practitioner, is to see some improvements, to feel better if you haven't been feeling well, to see some improvements in your menstrual cycle parameters, in particular, if you've been charting. And so when the first step is really recognizing, okay, so I need to find a practitioner whose goals then would align with mine. And so often, my suggestion is, if you are looking for somebody who's actually going to kind of look under the hood of the car, so to speak, so not just do a once over and just assume everything's okay, but really get in there and try to figure out what the root cause is, really trying to do some testing and some investigative work to figure out what's really at play, and really trying to understand better what are the factors that could be at the cause. So looking more to figuring out the root and then trying to support you in fixing that, versus just giving you a pill and looking for a number on a lab result. So if you know that you're looking for a deeper approach, then you have to kind of align that with your practitioner and really think about, okay, so what kind of practitioner could I go to whose goal, whose intention is more in line with me wanting to feel better, more in line with me wanting to figure out what's wrong. And it's a really common experience that you might have had yourself, but a number of my clients have had, and the women in my Facebook community, where they've learned, about charting. And so now they're charting their cycles. Maybe they're wanting to use the method for birth control, or maybe they're even having a conversation with their practitioner about potentially coming off hormonal contraceptives and relying on this method for birth control. And essentially they're laughed out of the office, and the practitioners are really discouraging, and not all practitioners, obviously, some practitioners. And so part of this process of finding a practitioner is, the first thing is really recognizing that different practitioners come from different perspectives, and not every practitioner is going to align with your perspective. And, that doesn't mean that all doctors are going to have this perspective, or all naturopaths are going to have that perspective, because within every single specialization, you are going to have practitioners who have different specializations and different interests. And so the key is really to spend some time thinking first, what is it that I want out of this exchange? And then the second thing is, can this practitioner give that to me? Okay. So that would be the first thing. And I think that one of the episodes that I've recorded, I would really suggest for you to head back and take a listen to, if you haven't listened to it, is episode number 104. In that episode, I interviewed Dr. Miranda Naylor, and she really gave us a good window into a physician's perspective. And I think that the key is to really understand, okay, your doctor went to medical school for how many years? They learned a particular specialization, a particular point of view, a particular way to treat illnesses. If you find that your doctor is suggesting things that you're not, or you're finding that they're not investigating your condition the way that you want it to be, and you find that maybe they're discounting some of the things that you've learned or read or that type of thing, in a way, what you're seeing is a reflection of that practitioner's perspective. So ultimately, you just really want to have a sense of the perspective that they're coming from. Really ask yourself, does this align with my perspective or not? And once you're clear on that, then you have a sense of who you need on your team and what each, team participant can offer you. So everybody needs a doctor on their team. We all need to have a really good doctor so that we can have testing done, so that whenever acute situations arise, we can seek that support. And we really need to have a medical professional on our team to consult for any changes that we're making. So it's really important to have a medical professional on your team. What you can do when choosing a practitioner is see if there are any practitioners in your area that are coming from a different perspective. If you're really interested in functional medicine and the idea of looking kind of at the root cause and trying to solve the problem and really getting a sense of why this could be a problem. So the classic example of that is, you go to your physician and you have menstrual pain, or you have irregular periods, and then your doctor is putting you on the pill. So that's not coming from a functional perspective. That's coming from a very allopathic, okay, so problem A means that you have to take pill B in a literal sense, but perhaps you have gotten to the point in your life where you're wanting some answers. And so what that means is that, it's very possibly time for you to look for a practitioner who is coming from a different perspective. And they're out there. There are so many medical doctors that have been trained or that have taken an interest or a specialization, in functional medicine. And so I think that the toughest part is that we formed relationships with our practitioners. And so the thought of going out there and trying to find someone new is very overwhelming and very daunting. It's a lot easier just to kind of continue going to the doctor that you've been seeing since you were a kid. Even though if you really sit down and think about it, if you're finding that the perspective of your physician no longer aligns with yours, even though it's challenging and even though it's inconvenient and even a little bit uncomfortable, the thought of going out there and trying to find another doctor, we're at the point where, especially if you are really struggling with a health issue, that just might be what you have to do. So that's kind of the first part. And that ties in with the second point that I wanted to share with you, which is that you really want to recognize that there's no one practitioner, from my perspective, from, the experiences I've had working with clients and personally, and you've probably had this experience too, that there's typically no one practitioner that has this magical ability to kind of fix all the problems. And so really do take that idea of a team participation or who's on your team, your health team, to heart, because often you do need the benefit of different practitioners that are coming from different perspectives. And what you'll find is that when you start doing a little bit of research, when you start to see which practitioners are in your area, first step, you can take to Google and do a search of functional practitioners in your area, functional nutritionist or naturopath with a specialization in fertility. What you find is that in your local area, there's all of these practitioners, and many of them have taken a special interest in a particular area. So that leads me to a really important point, which is that in kind of a perfect world scenario, if you're struggling with a particular issue, so if you're struggling with fertility challenges, if you're struggling with thyroid issues, if you're struggling with PCOS, if you're struggling with gut issues, if you're struggling with allergies and food sensitivities. So whatever is kind of that predominant challenge that you're facing, ideally you would want to work with a practitioner who just absolutely lives and breathes that issue, the practitioner who is specialized in that area, the practitioner who predominantly sees clients struggling with that particular issue. And that's because just in my experience, both professionally and personally, is that when you have a practitioner who has really taken the time to study a specific field and is really invested not just in like seeing patients and prescribing things, but a practitioner who's really invested in improving the health of their patients and has taken it upon themselves to really delve in and specialize in that field. So one thing you should know about specializations is that when practitioners graduate, the world is their oyster. It's up to them to really continue that professional development. And so what you find is that, with years of experience, so many practitioners out there, they find maybe that a certain type of patient keeps coming to them, or perhaps they had specific health challenges that led them to go on and specialize in particular fields. Or potentially they came out of their initial degree thinking that things worked a certain way, but then even had an illness themselves or someone in their family had an illness, and they had to kind of figure out how to really support them through that. And that has come out on the podcast so many times because one of my favorite questions to ask to the health professionals that I interview on the show is, what drew you to this work and how did you find yourself in this field? And there's so many different reasons, but often there's a personal experience of illness themselves that really just changed their life and rocked their world. If they really struggled with an illness for a period of time and they had to kind of step out of the box thinking to really sort out and heal their own health challenge, that has informed their work and really caused them to go and specialize in that field and learn more about that area. Others have had a family member who was ill, and they found that the training that they had received in school it kind of took them to a certain point, but then they had to kind of fill in the gap because their loved one was still sick. even though they had done everything that they knew how to do. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but I really, what you find when you start to talk to different practitioners. So I have spoken to and the podcast has given me this amazing opportunity to interview so many experts, so many guests, and so many different people in different fields. And what you find is that the specialization piece of it, that's something that a person takes on. It's kind of like that over and above type of situation. And so you want to find that practitioner who's really passionate about thyroid and really passionate about helping people to get better. You really want to find that practitioner who's really passionate about fertility and is really passionate about helping women to restore normal ovulatory function, normal menstrual cycle function naturally, if that's the route that you're wanting to take. So that's something I'd urge you to consider. And so you might be wondering, well, how would I know? And so, some of the kind of most basic ways to know are to start with a search for practitioners who specialize in certain areas and do your own research to kind of see what types of information that they're putting out there. A lot of, highly specialized practitioners have written books on the topics. You'll notice that they'll say right off the bat that I specialize in these topics. And many practitioners will say, I primarily work with clients that have these challenges. And many practitioners will describe their own experiences and say, I, struggled with, say, PCOS for a number of years, and I overcame that in this way. I did these things, and that informed my practice, and I went on to specialize in that field. So that's something that I think that you should strongly consider, because I have found that I have more success when I'm working with someone who I go into their office and they're kind of already at that vibration. They're already there. So it's more efficient. It saves time if you go to someone who's already on board. That's kind of the key when you're finding someone. So it's really about finding a practitioner who aligns with your own values. I just want to share a quick kind of story because I feel like it's helpful. And it's all of these experiences that have led me to really feel this way. And so, as many of the longtime listeners know, I've had thyroid issues for a really long time, going over 10 years, that since I was first diagnosed with hypothyroid. And over the years, what I found was that my interactions with my own medical doctor, there was increasingly more friction. And, my thyroid kind of just hung out and did its thing for a very long time. It didn't really there was no change, I guess I should say. And then throughout the 2 pregnancies, my thyroid went up and down. And so I ended up in my doctor's office quite a bit more because, all of a sudden my thyroid was destabilized by my pregnancy, and dosages had to be changed, and all of these conversations had to happen. And what I realized was that although my doctor is really incredible, he's a super nice guy. I've been seeing him for almost a decade, so we have a relationship. He's really nice. But what I found was that when I developed a more kind of acute thyroid situation, I guess you could say, so there were changes that all of a sudden now I needed more support in that particular area. All of a sudden I realized, wow, my doctor is probably not the best person for that particular issue. That doesn't mean he's a bad doctor. It doesn't mean that he's not a good person and that he doesn't have the best interests of his patients at heart, because I know he does have my best interests at heart, but he comes from a different perspective than I come from. So, I really want to work with somebody who is looking at the whole picture. And I'm not the biggest fan of taking pills forever. So I always want to know, I always want to ask the questions. Is there anything else I can do? Is there anything that I can do on my own to support my body? Are there any changes that I can make? And so I really like to engage with practitioners who entertain questions like that and have experience with clients of their own who have seen improvements by doing some non-invasive changes, because I'm the type of patient, I'm willing to make some changes. If you tell me to try something or to cut something out, I'm the type of patient that will try it. And then at least if it doesn't work, then I can say, okay, so I tried everything and I did everything within my power. So then if I have to take the medication, maybe that's the route I need to go. But at least for me as a person, that works for me. So what I want you to take out of it is part of it is to really know yourself. These types of situations when you find yourself, throughout the years, you've been relatively healthy, but maybe something comes up. Maybe for a lot of my clients, they've recently come off of hormonal birth control and they're kind of thrown into this shift where all of a sudden they have a challenge that just didn't exist before. So all of a sudden now there's issues going on with menstrual cycles. There's irregular bleeding, short luteal phase, just, there's certain things that you just were not dealing with 5 years ago. And so what you might find is that your practitioner, your doctor, the person that you've been going to since you were a kid, they're a really good doctor, but perhaps in this particular area, it's just not their specialization, or perhaps the approach that you would like to take is just different to the approach that they're offering you. And so what it comes down to, the first step before you can even choose a practitioner is figuring out, okay, what is it that I want? How do I want to approach this? What would feel good to me? And so one of the things that you can do is actually take a minute and think about what would an ideal doctor's appointment would be like. Now, if this seems silly, that's totally okay. But I think that it can be really helpful to actually take a moment and picture what would be the ideal scenario. So for me, a woman who charts her cycles, doesn't use hormonal birth control, and isn't the hugest fan of taking a ton of pills, my ideal scenario, so if I were to picture it, I would think, okay, so I want to work with someone who has experience working with people like me who are not like, who kind of want to minimize the amount of pills and things that they take, someone who is knowledgeable about the way that diet can impact health or lifestyle changes or other factors, someone who's willing to really support me in that kind of holistic way, and someone who's also willing to investigate. I like data. I like information. I want to know what's going on. And so I really want to work with someone who's just as curious as I am and who isn't just going to say like, oh, everything's fine when I'm feeling bad. I want someone to say, okay, so you're feeling bad. So that's a valid thing. It's not in your head. And so what we're going to do is we're going to investigate until we figure out what's happening. So that's kind of my ideal practitioner. That's someone who I want to work with. And so when I go about it in my own life, what I'm going to do is I actually did this recently because like I mentioned, it just got to a point where I realized, you know what, for this particular issue that I have, my doctor, he's a really great doctor, but for this particular issue, I think that I need to find a practitioner who is aligned more with me in how I would like to go about treating it. So then, I had to do a search and, looking for functional doctors with integrative practices. And so thinking of those keywords and then calling the office and talking to the receptionist and asking questions. So, hi, I was looking at Dr. So-and-so's website. I noticed that she specializes in fertility. I was just wondering, who are the majority of her clients? Who are the majority of clients that she works with? What is her specialization? What is she known for? What is her area of interest and area of specialization? And, most doctors will say, oh, I treat everyone, but there's usually a specialized area that person is really focused on. And so just by doing a little bit of recon, a little bit of research, and a little bit of legwork, you can gather a lot of information about some of the local practitioners in your area. And it doesn't have to take that long. Picking up the phone and talking to the receptionist can take 3 to 5 minutes. So although it might seem like this crazy big undertaking, you could grab 3 numbers off the internet and do this real quick on a 15-minute break if you needed to, and just think about, 3 to 5 questions that you could ask. Because I get a lot of emails from women who are kind of trying to figure this out. Like, okay, so I want to find a good practitioner. I'm not sure where to look. And so what I really believe that wherever you're living, there are amazing practitioners hidden in there. So don't discount the amazing practitioners that could be in your backyard, but you just have to look for them because they're there. Functional medicine, whether it's naturopathic doctors, whether it's Chinese medicine practitioners, or Chinese practitioners who practice acupuncture, or just traditional Chinese medicine, or just medical doctors who've taken an interest in functional medicine, medical doctors who've specialized in certain areas, or integrative practices where you have doctors working alongside with naturopaths and other functional medicine practitioners, these are becoming more and more common. So I think instead of thinking I have to find this, unicorn amazing practitioner and there's none where I live, you may live in a place where there's not a lot of options. You may live in a place where it's really small and there's just not a lot of practitioners available. But ultimately, if you spend just a couple of minutes doing a search, you'd probably be surprised at what you do find in your area. Choosing a practitioner, really thinking about who's in your area, doing a search, but first getting really clear on what your values are and how you want to approach the issue. What are you open to? What are you not open to? Maybe you're really open to Western medicine suggestions, but you just really want to try something a little more natural first. And that's okay. You really just have to first decide, like, okay, so what is it that I really want to do? What am I comfortable with? And that will help you to figure out how to go about choosing a practitioner. So the second aspect of that, though, is that if you find yourself in front of a practitioner who you then realize isn't aligned with your perspective, what do you do? What I would encourage you to do is really try to take a moment, try to take a step back and recognize, like I mentioned earlier, that your practitioner, to get where they are, invested a lot of time, energy, money into their education, into their specialization, to really get to where they are at the professional level that they're at. And so you kind of want to take that all into consideration and just think to yourself, every practitioner does have a specialization in a certain area, and every practitioner is going to have strengths and weaknesses, just like we all do, because there's no one practitioner that knows every single thing. And so the first thing is to kind of recognize that. I really like the analogy. It kind of comes up in like business type scenarios. Or even if you think about, say you want to apply for a job somewhere and you found a really great company and you go and, you talk to the receptionist and you're like, okay, so how would this work if I want to apply for a job? And the receptionist says, we're not hiring. Well, you have to ask yourself, does the receptionist have the ability to hire and fire? Probably not. You're probably not talking to the right person. And so sometimes one of the questions that you just need to ask yourself, is this person really qualified to tell me what they're telling me? So if you're seeing a general practitioner and they're telling you, well, there's nothing you can do to improve your thyroid health, you have to ask yourself, has this person spent years studying, doing all of the research, with all of the thousands of clinical studies on thyroid health? Has this person taken any kind of, extracurricular training or professional development in the area of thyroid within the last, 1 to 3 years? Has this person been to any functional medicine conferences? Are they kind of at the cutting edge of the latest research and the latest trends in thyroid health in particular? And so once you really start to think about it, in every field, there are ample opportunities for professional development. Many of the practitioners are right there reading the latest research, reading the latest books, and really improving their own skills. And other practitioners are not doing that, at least in that particular area. So you kind of want to qualify in your mind. You don't necessarily, I wouldn't suggest for you to ask these questions unless you really wanted to. I don't think it's a good idea to get into kind of like a fight or a combat, but more this is in your own head thinking, do I think that this person is really up with the latest trends? Do they really have a good understanding? Do they have a specialized interest in thyroid health? Have they supported any patients to get off their medication ever? Have they ever helped a patient to truly kind of beat this? Is that something that has ever happened in their practice? And if the answer to those questions is no, then you can kind of politely thank you for your input. I really appreciate your suggestions. What I'm going to do is do a little bit of research and see what is going to work best for me. And that's it, because you have to kind of respect where that person is coming from. And as I mentioned that, I think that you can ask your practitioner certain questions. And I think that it is fair. So I'm picking on thyroid health just because it's coming to mind, but you could apply this to any other condition, whether it's a fertility challenge or PCOS, and you could kind of flat out ask the practitioner, I'm curious, how many patients have you supported to really heal their thyroid naturally and come off of that medication, or at least reduce their dose? And then just stop and pause and wait for their response. How many patients have you supported to really get off of their medication for PCOS and resume regulatory ovulatory function naturally? And pause and blink a couple times and see what their response is. How many patients have you helped to really restore their metabolism, even though they had a thyroid condition so that they were feeling better? And just wait and see their response, and don't necessarily go into a judgment, but you have the right as a patient to kind of qualify who you're talking to. And so it doesn't mean that that practitioner is good or bad. It just means potentially the way I would look at it is that they just have not taken a specialized interest in that area. One of the resources that I haven't talked about that you really should tap into when you're looking for a practitioner is your own personal network. Think about your friends, your family, whether it's your parents on your mom's side, your dad's side, or your partner, their family and friends. But really think about who's in your network. Who do you know that has potentially struggled with some of the challenges that you're facing now? Are you able to reach out to them and say, I've been struggling with this, and I know that you or maybe your sister struggle with this, and I was just wondering, do you have any recommendations for practitioners? What did you like about your practitioner? What didn't you like about your practitioner? What perspective were they coming from? Did your practitioner give you lots of pills, or did your practitioner suggest some change? Like whatever it is that you are trying to find, I think we can often forget that if you really take a moment to think about it, all of you, I'm sure, have people in your network who have struggled with some of the similar challenges that you faced. And that could be a goldmine for some of those local practitioners in your area who you may just not know about. What I often hear from women is that until they are facing their own challenges, whether it be with infertility, whether it be with miscarriage, whether it's thyroid issues or whatever the case is, it's until they start talking to their friends about their own challenges, often they're amazed at how much their friends had gone through and potentially hadn't talked to them about it. So that's one thing. I've said it on the podcast before. It wasn't until I experienced my own miscarriage that all of a sudden I realized how many of my friends had miscarriages. Like I had no idea, because a lot of them it just hadn't come up in conversation. They just hadn't talked to me about it. And it wasn't until I shared my own experience that I realized like people were coming out of the woodwork with this stuff. So make sure to tap into your own network. Ask the people that you know. If you see one functional practitioner, you can ask about other, in their area, or people do you know anyone who specializes in PCOS? I think just by doing those things, you would be surprised at how much, whereas, at the beginning, you may have thought there's no one in my area. And after just doing a few searches, like making a couple phone calls, and you could do that as well if you find that you call a practitioner in your area and you find that they don't specialize in the field, and you could just ask, do you know of any practitioners who specialize in in the MTHFR gene mutation? Like, do you know any practitioners who specialize in gut health? Do you know any practitioners who specialize in SIBO? And you might be surprised to find a bunch where you didn't think that there was any. And so to summarize all of those different points, you really want to know where your practitioner is coming from. You want to know their perspective and understand that. You want to really get a sense of their goals. I think it's really helpful to know what their track record has been. This could just be because of my experience interviewing, but by doing this podcast and by having interviewed over, 100 and I'm pretty sure it's over 150 people, because I still have banked episodes that I haven't aired. So I've interviewed a lot of people, and that has given me different skills and perhaps just the confidence to ask more questions. And you would be surprised what happens when you ask some really intentional questions. So even just asking, you have the right to ask a practitioner in a very nice, non-confrontational way. I'm just curious, do you have a lot of patients with thyroid disorders? Have any of your patients been able to come off of medication? I'm just curious, do you have any patients with PCOS, or have you ever worked with somebody who has menstrual pain? Have you ever supported somebody to get rid of their menstrual pain without medication? I'm just curious, because I heard that it's possible to do that. And just by asking those questions in a non-confrontational way and not, just letting them give their response and being really polite, not trying to argue with them, but just really getting a sense, you will get a sense of where they're coming from. And that is golden. So that's really helpful. And also recognizing that even if you find the most amazing practitioner that totally aligns with you and is specialized in PCOS and they have treated, thousands of patients successfully and all of that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be an expert in every single area. So maybe they're not going to be able to 100% support you with your gut issues or something like that. So I think it's really helpful to know that even when you find an amazing practitioner, it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to help you with every single thing. And so that just ties in line with recognizing that each practitioner has strengths and weaknesses. And again, I think it's really important to go into this whole process with a really clear idea of what you want to happen. What do you want that exchange to look like? And believe that it's possible, because although I've had a number of negative experiences over the years in doctors' offices asking for testing and being told that it's not necessary and all that kind of stuff and having these fights and, these kind of disagreements. I've also had experiences where it's like the person is in my brain, like they're asking me all these questions and I'm like, yes, thank you, please do that test. Yes. Oh my goodness, I was wondering about that diet. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And it's just this incredible experience. So I've had both experiences. And so, I really want you to know that there are amazing practitioners out there. And with a little bit of search and effort on your part, you can really find someone who aligns with you and have those really good experiences. But the first step is to believe that it's possible to have that experience. And only then will you open yourself up to actually finding somebody who is aligned essentially just with your values, with your approach and how you want to be treated. And then also making sure to tap into your network. So that is kind of the summary in terms of choosing a practitioner. Those are the main points that I wanted to talk to you about today. But there is something that I wanted to leave you with. One of the things that I find is that we can really get lost in the logistics of the process when we're trying to heal our bodies. And by logistics, I mean all of those very tangible, specific things that we can do, all of the dietary changes and supplements and just all of the kind of restrictive, very quantitative, measurable things that we can do. And so one of the things that I speak about it a lot on the podcast, and it really comes up in my client work. It's come up on the interviews that I've released. It just comes up time and time again. And that's part of the intangible aspects of this process. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to really think about is that you really want to recognize that the dietary lifestyle pieces, supplementation, if you and your practitioner have decided that that's necessary for support, all of those things play a very important role. But for some women, the perfect diet and supplements by themselves, it's not always 100% of the story. So that goes to the idea of a team when you're thinking about who do you want on your team, and that goes into your personality, and also getting into for you to really start to take a moment to really figure out, what's going on, what's behind some of this stuff. What do I need? Everyone has different people on their team, and when I talk about team, medical doctor, functional practitioner, perhaps a naturopathic doctor, perhaps a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, perhaps an Arvigo therapist if you're struggling with some menstrual cycle complaints, perhaps an energy healer, perhaps a yoga teacher, perhaps a fertility awareness educator, someone who can support you in understanding the menstrual cycle. But everyone is different. And what is really interesting is that in all the interviews that I've done and all the client work that I've done, one of the things that when I find when someone has experienced a major shift, so whether that is a huge shift in their menstrual cycles, so perhaps their menstrual cycle parameters were really off. Perhaps I've had a number of clients who've had just a number of different things, whether it's continuous mucus observations or bleeding throughout the menstrual cycle, or short luteal phases, or even dry cycles. And then you'll see at some point there's a shift. And so, of course, one of the questions I'm going to ask is, well, what was happening around the time that we see the shift? What do you think made the biggest difference? And you would expect it to always be like, okay, so I was taking my supplements and I was, I determined what was the best diet for me and I was organizing that. I was working with a practitioner and they told me to, eliminate these things and I did that. And you would expect that kind of tangible stuff would always be the thing that made the difference. But I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to someone and they say, I was in a really bad relationship, and I decided that it was time for me to let that go. And from then, I didn't have any more pain in my like stuff like that happens all the time. And you've heard it in a number of my recent interviews where it's like, well, I actually quit my job. I decided that I wanted to follow my dream, which is to do this type of work instead of the type of work I was doing. And then my period came back. And so don't quit your job. I'm not telling you to do that. And I am not promising that if you do that, your period is going to come back. But I think you can tell the broader meaning and implication of what I'm saying, which is there is something to be said for really thinking about that bigger picture. And sometimes illnesses happen in our lives, and it's the illness itself or the health challenge or health struggle that causes us to really get in touch with what it is that we really want inside. What is it that makes me happy? What is it that I always wanted to do but never did? What is it that I used to love to do when I was a little girl? But I thought I was always told that I couldn't make a living doing that. So now I decided to go into this other field because I knew it would be safe. What is the thing that, I always wanted to do? And sometimes it's about more than just, eating lots of kale and taking out gluten. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's given you some ideas and some really specific strategies to go about finding a practitioner in your area who aligns with your perspectives, because we all need practitioners on our team. The last thing to leave you with is also that when you are searching for a functional practitioner, so when you're going to see a naturopath, when you're going to see a traditional doctor, a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, for example, you may be under the impression that so every single one of these practitioners is automatically going to be aligned with me. They're automatically going to be coming from the same perspective. And so the same exact discussion that I'm having applies to functional practitioners as well. You may find that you go to, some naturopaths, for example, may be more prone to, it's kind of like you're in a doctor's office, but instead it's a naturopath and they're prescribing supplements instead of medication. And similarly, you might get that same sense of like, I feel like they're throwing all of this stuff at me, but they're not really giving me that piece, the dietary piece or whatever it is. And so I'm just trying to really share a balanced perspective, because in my experience, both personal and professional, it applies across all fields, which is that ultimately, regardless of who you're sitting in front of, you still want to make sure that you're aligned. And just because a person has a particular designation doesn't mean that they have a specialization in that area. And it also doesn't mean that they are aligned with you in your values. It's more of a challenge for you because it means you have to take a more active role. You can't just kind of go in there and assume, okay, this person knows everything. I'm just going to give myself over to them and they're just going to fix everything for me. It involves really taking ownership and first of all, figuring out, okay, what is it that I want? What is it that I need? What type of support do I want? Can this person give me that support? Okay, what kind of support can this person give me? Okay, I need that kind of support. So this person is going to be on my team, but I recognize that they're not going to be able to support me in this area. And so I'm going to actually find someone who can support me in this area to complement this person who I'm going to. So I hope this has kind of shed some light, given a bit of a balanced perspective, and really will help you to choose a practitioner, and kind of also getting us to the point where we stop putting practitioners on pedestals and recognize that every practitioner has a specialization, a certain area of interest, certain skills in certain areas, but perhaps not in other areas. We really need to keep that in mind when we're going to practitioners so that we can really be the ones who are in control. So I picture it as a boardroom. So you're at the head of the table. You have all of these practitioners who specialize in different areas. And some of them, maybe you need this person for a period of time when you're going through a particular struggle. So I don't see my midwife today. She was on my team though when I needed her, but she's not there today. So sometimes people are there for periods of time. But ultimately, everybody is coming from a different perspective. Everyone has different training, different experience, different specializations, different skills. They're all going to kind of put forth their suggestions based on their knowledge and their experience. But you are the one sitting at the head of the boardroom, and you have to decide what you're going to do with all of that information. You're the one who has to compile it, break it down. you're the one that has to decide who gets to sit at your table. And then once they've presented their own perspectives, you're the one that has to decide what you're going to implement, what you're not going to implement, what feels right, what doesn't, what is actually appropriate for you and what's not. Because ultimately, it's time for you to be empowered in this whole process and really be cared for the way that you deserve to be cared for. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to today's show. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, I would like to invite you to head over to the show notes page at fertilityfriday.com/143. And you can leave a comment there. And you can also share the episode with a friend. If you found the episode to be helpful and you know that someone that you know can benefit from it, I would love it if you would share the show. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I was really excited to come on the show and talk about these topics because it's something that comes up in all of the client work that I do, essentially. The importance of finding someone, a trained practitioner who specializes in the field that you're looking for support in. It's something that really, any of my clients who are struggling with some sort of health challenge, it comes up in all of those conversations. And it's really key and really important to be working with a practitioner who really has a specialization in the field that you are looking for support in. Because really and truly, in order to see the big health improvements and the big shifts that you're looking for, whether it's in your menstrual cycle health, your fertility, if you're not working with a practitioner who is skilled and trained in that area, it can just add additional time. So I believe in doing things efficiently and in the least problematic way as possible, a way that has the least amount of friction and is essentially the simplest or easiest way. And so the simplest or easiest way to really achieve what you're looking to achieve when you are looking for support with a health-related challenge is to, walk into the door and sit down and have an appointment with a practitioner who's already on board, who you don't have to convince of anything, who is up with the latest research in that area and is really looking to support you in the way that you want it to be supported. So in the same way that I'm not going to go to like Chuck E. Cheese and expect to get like a 3-course meal with steak and shrimp. Maybe that's a bad example, but you have to kind of know who you're going to and what to expect from them. So I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I also hope that it's given you a couple specific tips and ideas and strategies for how to go about finding a practitioner in your area that is skilled and trained in that area. One of the realistic and challenging pieces that I should touch on is that for many of you, you may know that there are amazing practitioners in your area, but these practitioners may not be covered by your insurance. These practitioners may require more of an investment upfront, out of pocket. And so that piece is always very challenging and obviously it can be very expensive just depending on your unique situation. And so it's a tough one. It's a difficult challenge. What I see in the work that I do is that the menstrual cycle doesn't lie. What makes me sad is when I see essentially a person spinning their wheels, kind of trying to do everything on their own, but really not seeing any real significant shifts in those menstrual cycle parameters. And kind of knowing that if you were able to find the practitioner who really and truly is able to support you and really help you to figure out, do that really important investigative work to figure out what's underlying, what's really the cause, that you could really be supported in those areas. So it's a lot to think about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. So if you're not part of the Fertility Friday Facebook community, I would definitely encourage you to join us in there and jump into the conversation. I want to hear what your experiences have been like. Have you been able to find an awesome practitioner? How did you do it? Was it a referral from a friend, or did you just do a search, or did you just get lucky and find an awesome practitioner? Or are you still looking for a practitioner? Have you gone to a few with kind of varying results? Have you found someone that you really resonated with? So I'd love to hear more about that. So jump into the group fertilityfriday.com/community, and I'd love to hear more about your experiences with your practitioners. So thank you so much for listening to the show. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.